So, thank you very much for returning. I would like to continue with the second part of our morning session. And the next speaker, Professor Klaus Töpfer, needs very little introduction. He has, of course, a very high profile, not only in Germany, but in Europe in general, and perhaps even internationally. He served as the Federal Minister for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety under Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and since then has actually spent quite a bit of time also at the international level with the United Nations, and is now the director of the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam in Germany. Dr. Töpfer will give his presentation in German, so I encourage you, for those of you who are not fluent in German, please use the headphones for the simultaneous translation. So, Professor Töpfer, I would like to welcome you to the podium, and we look forward to your presentation. Sorry.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I have to disappoint you. I try to speak in English. Being for 8 years an Undersecretary General of the United Nations system, headquartered in Nairobi in Kenya in Africa, it's not very easy to do this with your German mother tongue. And therefore, I tried in English again. But those mother tongue English-speaking people, I have to warn, they have to overcome my German English. But I always underline that the price the British has to pay for the globalization of their language. They have to overcome my language as well, knowing that the one or the other Chinese English speaking is even worse for their eyes. So everything fine. And if you cannot understand it, please let me know. I can do it also in German. French will be a little bit more difficult. First and foremost, thank you very much for the invitation. I have to confess that listening to the speakers until now, I'm a little bit concerned whether you have invited at the very end of this important conference something like a lay person to discuss with the experts. So I will do my very best to run up to at least some additional information, knowing that one of the famous German comedians, cabarettist Karl Valentin, once mentioned, everything is already said, but not yet from everybody. So I am everybody, only to give you also this explanation. And to make it very clear, I don't want only to stick to this topic, but to add it to the main reasons for having those problems on hand, being 8 years, as mentioned, in Africa, being responsible for environment policy and from human settlements, it gives you the right, the title to do this. No doubt, and it was proven again and again in the speeches and the presentation, the brilliant presentation you learned until now, yes, there is a divided world of nutrition. We saw it again and again. Those who go hungry, we learned just the new figures from the FAO, and it happens that I was also the vice president of Welthungerhilfe in Germany, the German food aid on an NGO basis, and they always calculate with IFPRI in Washington what they call the World Health Indicator, Hunger Indicator, and they presented it in the beginning of this week in Bonn and Berlin, giving the clear signal, yes, there is still hunger, but it is a decreasing number, And you can see those going hungry are mainly concentrated in the so-called developing countries. They are mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in some areas of the Caribbean and the Southern Asia. You can see it in a map, you saw it. I don't want to go to any explanation, only to underline, yes, you see there are differentiations, divided world. If you go even further, you can see this is decreasing, and you see the numbers. All this most probably mentioned more than once in this conference before, and therefore I'm entitled also to be as fast as even possible going through those figures. And you see, yes, that is divided. But my main question is that an isolated fact that the world is divided with regard to hunger and nutrition? Most probably not. And if you see, this is, again, to underline that there are the division. We have on the one side around about 900 million children underweight and about 43 million overweight. Malnutrition as a very important part. All this to underline with these figures very updated quite now from this report I mentioned in the beginning. If you have this, once more, is that unique or does it have reasons? And I quote from the thank you speech of Mohammed Yunus. You know, he was a receiver of the Peace Nobel Prize in 2006. And at the end of his speech, he mentions that world income distribution gives you a very telling story. 94% of the world's income goes to 40% of the population, while 60% of people live on only 6% of world income. Half of the world population lives on $2 a day, and he comes to the conclusion this is not a formula for peace. And that is the main conclusion. We have a divide in a globalized world. We have a huge differentiation. When I had the chance to be with UNEP, we developed a technology well known now, and most probably you saw those maps as well. You can ask the question, what would be the size, what would be the shape of our wonderful blue planet Earth if you shape it according to the population? And then you see the following picture. You see that India is increasing quite drastically. You see that also China and the South Asian region is increasing. You see still a slimmer Africa. This changed, so you can see that this picture is already some years old. And you see that both Americas are slimming. By the way, it could be a good recommendation overall, at least to the North Americans. I tried my very best to be a little bit slimmer than I used to be coming to Engelberg. And if you see this, and you compare it now with a figure, what is the size and what is the shape of the world if you use as indicator the GDP per capita? And then you come to this picture. When I go to a school and when I go to young people, I always show only those two pictures. Yes, you can update them, but the message is not changing drastically. These are the challenges we are confronted with. And this. And don't believe that this is an academic finding. Quite in the contrary. You know that we have in Europe quite now, and the United States as well, forget Japan. Intensive discussion, what are we doing with those people having no perspectives at home and going out of their home? They are refugees, they are crossing the Mediterranean, they are coming. I always learned if you have a differentiation in income or whatever economic or well-being indicator, and you don't have a wall, what you are producing are migrations, are mobilities. Don't believe that this is theoretical. We learned this lesson in Germany, by the way. You know, until 25 years ago, we were a divided country. There was a wall, no possibility for migration. That was not this difference, it was this difference. And what happened when the wall was removed? Of course, we did our utmost to invest a lot in the former GDR, and now it bears fruit as well. But the main reaction of the people were to go out. In those 25 years of German reunification, of those 18 million citizens of the former GDR, more than 2 million left their country. And you may imagine, of course, that these 2 million were not those, mainly the undereducated, the old. No, it are the young people, it are those well-educated, and so they are decreasing the probability of increasing the economic potential in the future again. To make it even more direct relevant also in Europe, if you see the development in Europe quite now, we are going in such a direction. The last figures of youth unemployment in Europe, in the European Union, the development of unemployment of young people is, for example, in Spain, 53%. 53%. It's a lost generation. In Italy, it's a little bit lower, 47%. In Greece, you have a comparable figure. In my country, in Germany, it is lower than 7%. What is happening? We have an in-migration of the young people from the southern part. And we have to do our utmost to avoid what I call the mezzogiornization of Europe. You know the mezzogiornization problem in Italy, that in the southern part of Italy, there is also this differentiation, and the younger, the better educated and dynamic, entrepreneurial-oriented people, they are going to the north and backing the differentiation since some generations. So having those pictures, that is not something like, let me say, forget it. Hopefully that's their job. No, it is our job as well. If we cannot give those people here in India, in Africa, a perspective for their life at home, we will have the consequence. Our friends in the United States of America learn the same with regard to their southern border to Mexico. What we see in the television, that the children are running from Honduras or Nicaragua, risking their lives, it is exactly the same part. We have globalized information. People know that is the paradise. Let's go and be there. So it is our interest in developed countries to do everything to avoid this huge gap. What my friend Mohammed Yunus mentioned, this is not a formula for peace. And therefore, what we are discussing here and what you discussed has a lot of need for very technical and very deep, scientifically rooted findings. We must learn the lesson. But at the end of the day, we must also give the information to all our people at home that what is not done here now will be a huge burden for the coming generation. In the year 2050, you know, we will go in the direction of around about 9 billion people living on this planet Earth. I learned in the preparation paper that you are more, maybe realistic, I believe, that you are aware of going above 8 billion. 9 billion are also above 8, so that is covered. The increase rate is going slower and slower up. We have only 2 main global regions with a huge increase to this 9 billion, that is the Indian subcontinent, and that is Africa. There is no population increase anymore, as you know, in China. Not surprising, they decided in 1974, last century, to come to a one-child family policy, and they are not known for deciding something and not implementing it, enforcing it, and they did it. I have a chair at the university in Shanghai, at Tongji University. I have always asked my students, do you have a brother, do you have a sister? They don't. With a huge burden for their social stability in the future. I cannot go on this. So that is no increase in China. It's easy, and it is mentioned in your papers as well. India will be bigger and bigger and more people living in India than in China. by the way, one of the main global geopolitical experiments. What will be the better option for the future? India or China? A decentralized, more democratically organized development process, or a top-down, more or less central planning, integrating market elements as China? Being in Africa, you must be aware that this is one of the big lifetime experience, and they are following very closely what is the solution for this. It's also something to do with what we call our obligation to bring more and more people to democracy. Again, that goes beyond my topic, but I want at least to mention it, that you are not, and I don't believe that you ever had the feeling, but if you go out of this group, there's a lot of understanding for those topics. So what is to do? You know, it is always good to make an analysis, but if after the analysis nothing is happening, it is wasted time. Of course, you know that we had once a Chancellor, Helmut Schmidt, and he always mentioned those who have a vision shall go to the doctor. He was always afraid that those with the visions make the vision an alibi for acting now. And at least in my experience as a politician, it was always the main perspective. Let's wait for the best of tomorrow and that do good today, and the worst of yesterday remains. To overcome this is necessary. Not that we are coming directly to the paradise, but that we have an idea where to go and what is necessary to consider. If I have a divided world with hunger and nutrition, and we have it, then I have to question, if it is divided, what can we do? Of course, if we have two parts different, you can say you avoid the division by decreasing the one side. Or you can say we increase the other one. These are two possibilities. Quite a number of people at home are also now discussing, do we have something like an overconsumption? What is the role of consumption of food in our so-called wonderful developed world? In my country, food is more and more an entertainment subject. And there are statistically and very clearly analyzed interrelation that with the increase of cooking shows in television, there's a decrease of people cooking. And it is an increase of food waste. It is an increase of food waste because quite a number of those are very convinced they want to make this at home as well, and they buy the stuff and they never do it. Because that gives you some skills maybe, and maybe also some additional time. And if you are sitting together with 5 or 6, fine. But if you cook for yourself, it's not the same endeavor as if you're sitting alone in front of a television set and see what they are doing there. Entertainment via living in other parts of the world. This is analysis again. And if I ask what is the topic for this, we are discussing, yes, we have to increase, and it was mentioned more than once, and to change. If I go to increase, I come to efficiency, and I come to the productive factors necessary for the production of food. Intensively discussed is again and again water. Why so? It may be a limiting factor. What I learned in my active time, especially on the global level, was we don't have a water quantity crisis, but what we have is a water investment and a water administration crisis. We made a study in all big cities in Africa, not a single one has less than 50% water loss in the distribution system. The recycling quota of water in this world is a little bit above 10%. We cannot close the cycle enough. That is an investment topic. It is not a quantity availability of water topic. And of course also we can go in this detail, I don't do it, please go to the World Water Week in Stockholm and you will have a wonderful possibility to go to all those structures topic. The next topic is much more interesting because it is more or less forgotten in our discussion, and that is soil. Soil. Soil is a non-renewable part in our world. And in my institute, I was the founder of this institute. Don't let the old people make institutes, always a risk. Anyhow, we did it. And if you come to, as we have one very concentrated point, that is soils. We started what we call the Global Soil Week together with the Global Water Week in Stockholm, cooperating with the Stockholm Environment Institute and those responsible for this. And for this, we made a little film on soil. It's only, I think, 4 or 5 minutes. It's in the meantime, of course, on the web and translated in 8 or 10 languages, more than millions of clicks. And I want to give you the pleasure to see it, a little bit, to see that we have to do a lot to bring the people in the awareness of soil. If you can give the film.
We overlook it. We walk all over it, trample it every day. Yet we need it, like the air we breathe. It's about time that we talk about soil, and certainly about time that we start protecting it. There can be no life without it. It feeds us, and we are responsible for it. Soil is formed from rocks that are decomposed slowly by the sun, the wind and the rain, by animals and plants. In this way, 10 centimeters of fertile soil are created in 2,000 long years, only 10 centimeters in 2 millennia. Soil that we deplete in only a few years, gone forever. Forests and plants protect the soil. But every year, 13 million hectares of forest are cut down. Fields are cultivated inadequately. Added to that are monocultures and farming on slopes. After the harvest, fields are left naked and unprotected. All this greatly accelerates erosion. And so, gone with the wind, washed away by water. 24 billion tons of fertile soil were lost in 2011 alone. A loss of 3.4 tons per person worldwide, no matter what age. Erosion costs each person $70 per year, a worldwide cost that amounts to $490 billion, an astronomical amount. Our cities are also growing rapidly. Every year in Europe, an area as large as the city of Berlin is transformed into urban areas. Half of these soils are sealed. This is soil from which nothing can grow. But fertile soil is finite and therefore invaluable. Investors and states have realized this. The race for the soils of the world has already begun. Land grabbing, often with questionable means for questionable purposes. Millions of hectares of land change owner every year. The price? Ruined lives, uprooted families. Usually, these are the poorest of the poor. Often they have no choice. They destroy the forest because they need land to survive. We need healthy and fertile soil, now more than ever. Projections say the available arable land per Earth inhabitant will be reduced by half by 2050. But already today, 1 billion people go to bed hungry night after night. That's 1 billion people too many, and this number will increase every day if we do not distribute soil fairly. If we do not increase yields dramatically on every piece of land, or simply discover a second Earth, but we might not want to rely on that option. Soil and land issues rarely get our attention, or that of our policymakers. We see the full supermarket shelves and believe that things will stay like this forever. We live on credit at the expense of soils, but they are not inexhaustible. We take out money from a bank account into which we never make any deposits. One day this account will be empty, our credit overdrawn, and our soils will be gone. But there is good news. We have long known what we must do in order to preserve soils for our children. Let's remember, soil is a sensitive living being who wants to be taken care of. It is not a factory. Everyone has a right to soil. This right must be safeguarded by the law. And we cannot afford to bury our livelihood under a layer of asphalt. Now it's up to us. We must open our eyes and find ways to apply our knowledge, so we don't end up losing the ground under our feet.
Don't criticize too much. I know it is very rough. But if you go in this civil society we are living in, unluckily or luckily you cannot go in all the details. That is, by the way, the burden of a politician. Reduce complexity without changing the truth. One of the main challenges at all. If you go in Germany to television, to the main news, and you will have for climate change or agricultural production 1 minute, then you are already a king. Reduces complexity is also tried in this little animation. By the way, it was awarded numbers of times, and we are doing something like this now also with climate engineering. Because what is also the follow-up of this is, of course, if soil is going and we cannot stop it, so we have to make research with regard to a soil-free agricultural production. And you know that this is well underway. That is also linked with urban agriculture. That is all linked with the fact, can we avoid to have soil and other soil function, not only agricultural production, for example, storage of carbon and others, the biodiversity in soils. On another way, I only want to open your eyes in the direction of what Paul Crutzen, the Nobel Prize laureate, for his findings of the interrelation between chemicals and the destruction of the ozone layer, mentioned that we are already in the Anthropocene, that we left the Holocene. And the main characteristics in the Anthropocene, in the man-made world, will be engineering. A huge challenge. I can only give you this tip to inform a little bit more on this. That is not a visionary or a pessimistic, it is a very realistic discussion going on in this field, where one of the consequences, and especially also in some writers and thinkers and researchers, the States, but also in Germany, they are going in the direction where Life magazine in 2012 made his publication 12 Ideas Changing the World. Number 1 of these 10 is forget nature. Nature is over. Nature is what we do with nature. All this is behind those little information, and I cannot go, and I don't want, and I need to go in more detail. I also want to inform you that the divided world of hunger and nutrition is not so very divided, it's very interrelated. Because the well-being of the one, the overnutrition of the one side, is mainly also with negative consequence to the others. So I prepared some information in this, but I only want to give you if you see this, we ask, where, by the way, is our food coming from? And what is the import of soils in Germany? We import in Germany something like 60 million hectare soil. 60 million hectare. There's a calculation for the European Union altogether, and you see some of those. We have a very, very intensive meat production. By the way, also very concentrated. So if you come in some parts of Lower Saxony, you can smell it that you are in the meat production region in the world. 10 million pigs, 200 million chickens, and so on. My first colleague as a Minister for Agriculture once mentioned that our cows are grazing at the La Plata River. That's true, but unluckily, they make their liquid manure in Germany. So we are going out of the cycle. We are again in a very, very far-reaching consequence for this. And we must be aware that this is also contributing in addition to what we have as a problem with regard to feeding 9 billion people. And it goes without saying that what we are doing with regard to energy is of highest importance for the overall situation in agriculture as well. You know, agricultural production is more and more energy intensive. It's very intensive. There's a wonderful saying, we are eating oil. If we have, and the higher in the process, the higher the energy efficiency. By the way, also the soil and the land intensity. So if you go this, then we have to ask, where is this energy coming from? The second topic, soil and energy. By the way, therefore, in my institute, we have concentrated on those two topics. That is not by chance, I have to add, you know, that the stupid Germans decided to opt out of nuclear and to opt out also in the perspective of fossil fuels and to want to go to renewables. And each and everybody around the world, not each and everybody, quite a number, especially those directly linked with economic activities, are convinced this is absolutely stupid. And that is only a reaction to the German Angst. We added a new word like kindergarten and Rucksack in the English language, Angst. Please believe me, it was not. I was asked by the Chancellor in those days to be the chairman of the so-called ASIC Commission, how to make the future of energy. We were not driven by Angst. We were driven, you may imagine, and you may be surprised, by economic consideration. By economic consideration. I ask simply the question, where is the energy coming from for 9 billion people on this globe who want to have a decent life, and we must be interested that they have a decent life, otherwise they will make a destabilizing factor for the future of this earth. And so it was not the reaction that we have problems with nuclear. We didn't have problems with nuclear running. Of course, we have a lot of problems now in handling the waste, that's true. And so we couldn't change after Chernobyl at all because there was no alternative. And so we started the other way. When we started, for example, with photovoltaic, I was in those days a sitting minister for the environment, still in Bonn. We started to pay for 1 kilowatt hour photovoltaic more than €1 for 1 kilowatt hour. Incredible. But it was nearly produced nothing, it was very slow production. And our firm conviction was if we invest in science and technology and research, and then we invest in opening the market so to come to economies of scale, we will have a learning curve. And if we are in bigger production, the learning curve will give us good results. These are the figures quite now. This is a learning curve. That's not a curve produced by us in Germany. It is from Lazar Consultants, so that is, let me say, independent and maybe closer to the industrial part of the world than to the Greenpeace part of the world. And you see that we have a huge decrease of this. Of course, we have quite now a high price for energy in Germany because we have for 20 years to pay the high cost of the beginning. So we invested for the development of the technology. When I come back now to Africa and just come back from Abu Dhabi, where we have the International Renewable Energy Agency, when I come back from there, they always praise me and say, well done, my friend. it is now as low as it is on the brink that we use it as well. Because for Germany, we have, you may be surprised, but if you come to Germany, you have all the understanding. We have an average per year 900 solar hours, 900 solar hours. And we are developing solar energy. Believe me, that I was more than once asked by lots of people in Germany, are we absolutely crazy? Why is that not done in Africa or in Arabic countries? They have 3,000 and more solar hours. If we wait that this technology is developed there, we wait a long time. It is the obligation of a technology-leading nation or world. And therefore we did it. We believe that this is one of the additional answers, having in mind the increasing energy intensity of food production as well. And once more of my experience in Africa, we know in Kenya, we had altogether something like 10% of the people having access to electricity. Not surprising that the post-harvest losses are very high. I had the figures there as well, I skipped them. It must be, because if you want to decrease the post-harvest losses, then you have, of course, to do your utmost to close the infrastructural needs. And the infrastructural needs are very closely linked with energy available. And if you don't have it, you will have a wonderful speech to say, but we must fight post-harvest losses, but where it is coming from. So altogether, I want to concentrate your eyes at the very end of my speech on these two topics. Yes, we have a divided world, heavily divided world, but it is decreasing. Yes, we must do a lot to go and to make the analysis of the reasons that is not only divided but also heavily interrelated. And we have to concentrate on soil and energy to overcome perspectives and bottlenecks in the future. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Töpfer, for this really interesting and illuminating presentation. I open the floor for a few questions. Yes.
Dear colleague Töpfer, you mentioned we don't have a water crisis, we have a water investment and administration crisis. So I come to the topic, public administration, good governance. What is your experience in Africa and other parts of the world? Do we have a chance to improve this by education or other instruments, research? How to improve the administration ability? What is the best way? And I doubt that there could be a blueprint for the whole world, but it must be adapted to cultural specific situations, circumstances. But nevertheless, if you say this is one main reason for the crisis, administration, we should invest there in order to manage the crisis.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very important question, and thank you even more that you directly answered your question. That was helpful for me. Now, it is, of course, not something like a blueprint, and you can go to Dar es Salaam, and you can go to Lagos, and you can go to other cities in India or in Bangladesh. That's not possible. You have to tailor it, to make it very clearly linked with the cultural differentiation. My institute, we are trying now not to speak that we have sustainable development, but that we have sustainable developments. That is a plural of sustainable developments. And if you go in the global level that we are discussing now, whether there is a need not only to have Millennium Development Goals quite successfully, by the way, implemented, as we know, but that we have now also to develop sustainable development goals that was not coming from the developed world as a request, but from the development world, Colombia, Guatemala, later on also other developing countries. And we are working very hard in this direction, giving the differentiations. I'm very convinced if you want to have the one or the other instrument, it is not only a question of money. It is also a question of cooperation and capacity building. I remember in 2006, I was already the head of UNEP. We had 10 years after Rio 1992 in Johannesburg, the United Nations Sustainability Summit. And there was a request to make partnerships. And a lot of cities came and said, we make partnership with other cities there and bring our knowledge in different fields. Water was one, sewage water was one. Unluckily, that was a little bit linked with the example of the CDM, that you can do something out of your borders and to compensate it via your obligation at home. That didn't really fly, I have to confess. There are some good examples. So the city of Bonn made quite a very, very viable cooperation. We have, excuse me, I give you an example in Germany. We have federal states, so state of Rhineland-Palatinat, where I lived and where I was a minister as well, made a jumelage with Rwanda since quite a long time, and we are exactly working in this direction to give, for example, those responsible for sewage water treatment in mines the backing to go and to be in Rwanda, in Kigali, or in other cities there. There is something like this capacity building. That costs money as well. And by the way, my experience is you can much easier raise funds for the construction of a sewage power plant, but you can very difficultly raise money for capacity building. And by the way, you have also to be aware that we must be critical to ourselves. Our way to handle sewage water is absolutely not the right way to do it in the developing world. It is not. Our sewage water treatment technologies are very capital and energy intensive. Exactly those topics which are not available there. So we must go much more also in decentralized, structured technology. When I was a federal minister in Rheinland-Pfalz, being a little bit interested in environment, we started the so-called Pflanzenkläranlage. There were tourists going around and saying, look at this stupid guy, what he's doing. Now it is revitalized. We are in the same situation at home. Our rural areas are losing drastically population, and they have big sewage handling capacities there with a lot of money to pay, and this is driving the people even faster out of the rural areas. All this is to consider and to integrate there as well. I'm fairly sure that capacity building is at the center of all of this, and we learned the lesson, but we always forget the final consequences.
Let's have another question. There was a question here, and then we'll take you.
Very short, thank you very much. Where do you see the difference between poverty and hunger?
Can we take that as well?
The other question, and then we will answer both. Can you ask your question? Can we have the microphone over there?
I can also answer. Shall I answer directly?
Okay,
yes.
go ahead.
I saw already in this morning one of those graphs giving the direct interrelation of those two topics. And I believe if you make the same picture, what I did in the very beginning, you will have a very close interrelation without any doubt. But the topic is also going beyond hunger. It goes also to malnutrition. And it is not going to the developing world, but also to the developed world. You know that those overweight, obesity, is mainly linked with social factors. There are studies in the United States of America, there are studies in Europe, that there's a direct correlation. You have the cheap calories with the poor people, and then you have the fattening process. I, again, had it in the middle part what I cancelled, to say that this is, again, interrelation. That is not only rich people, no problems, poor people, all problems. Also in the rich world, there are lots of poor people. There are lots of people not having access to the right nutrition. It's not a single bigger town in Germany quite now not having what we call the Tafel, where poor people can go and to have something to eat, to pay nothing, and this is more or less what is coming from the retail business. as a Vice President of Welthungerhilfe, we are invited to our 50 years anniversary to a dinner under the title Taste the Waste. So we served only what was picked up from the waste. And you could see that this is not stupid. There's a wonderful film, by the way, on this topic as well. If you go a little bit more into detail, you come to this interrelation, but you have not only to make the placative saying it is interrelated, it is much more as this. I also want to highlight, if you invite a former politician, he is always speaking too long. It's unstopped.
Let's have one more question.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, we have at 12 o'clock, we have some more time for discussion.
Farmers, as main actors on soil, always made what science, for instance, agriculture scientists and politicians recommended. It's not science and politics the reason that we have this crisis on environment and food scarcity.
I would love to have this question to all the audiences and to let them answer in their conviction. It goes, I believe, very clearly. You cannot say politics. You have to differentiate very clearly. This said, because I didn't want to give a demoralizing signal to those people who want to who feel that they have also to take responsibility in politics. In Germany, it's a disaster if you make polls in the population on the ranking of different professions. The politician is the last or the second last. And each and everybody in my pub drinking a glass of beer and say, look at this, the politicians there. And they are happy. Not happy, but they are smiling. It is a disaster for an open democratic system. If this is going on, you cannot be surprised that people don't like to go to voting. I shall them. If they say these are only crooks and they are only not capable. So therefore I made this first mentioning. Don't make it too placative. There are lots of interrelations, of course, yes, and between politics and science. In this institute, I was asked to develop, this is one of the main questions. Why the devil? Do we have findings in science? Take it for climate science. Since quite a time, we have IPCC report number 5 already, giving all the figures and saying, but if we are not, we cannot reach the 2 degree and all this. And you go down in the real life and you see CO2 is increasing, not really changed. Why is that happen? Why is that not possible to give a better confidence to the broader public that science is really independent, not driven by interests and all this? It is a very, very intensive story, and I don't want to defend my previous position, but I want to at least give you the feedback, be a little bit more interrelated in this job as well, and then we are also not so placative, saying these are the politicians. And if science is not successful at the end of the day, they will always come back. That is due to the political stupid people there. And that's not enough, because then, please go, you are the wise man, make politics as well. Yeah. That is my very short answer to a global, absolutely difficult question. Being 8 years on the global level, I made all my studies, and if you have a time and we have a glass of wine in the evening, then we have more than one at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Dr. Töpfer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll give you this as a little token.